Canada is now crumbling into an authoritarian so-called post-national entity, as Prime Minister Trudeau likes to call it. The machinery of government is implementing anti-government crackdowns on freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and even freedom of thought.
And now, The Edwin Black Show. Sponsored by the books of Edwin Black, available on Amazon and at booksellers worldwide. And now, here's Edwin.
Welcome to the Edwin Black Show, coming to you twice monthly from Washington, D.C. Hello, I'm Edwin Black, investigative journalist, historian, and author of 215 editions in 40 languages in 190 countries worldwide, including IBM and the Holocaust, War Against the Weak, and the Farhud, as well as many other books. If you like our show's content, spread the word, subscribe for alerts at theedwinblackshow.com. And if you want to support our work, please visit theedwinblackshow.com/support. Your help, big or small, assures our complete and utter intellectual and uncensored journalistic independence. Today's episode is made possible and sponsored without any preconditions, requests, or stipulations by Faye Lincoln's very needed book, Values That Shape the World, available across the planet, as well as the Fuel Freedom Foundation, which is seeking more diverse and cleaner energy for the entire planet, and co-sponsored by Phyllis in Jerusalem in honor of Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu's thunderous address yesterday to a joint session of Congress. I'll never forget it. If you would like to honor someone with a sponsorship, get in touch. That said, I only speak for myself and for history. The same goes for my guests. Today, we welcome viewers from across America, including our 4 watch parties in the villages. Newton, Mass. Hi, guys. Chicago. It's going to be a problem for you soon. And Tampa Bay. Hello, Harvey. Overseas, I see viewers logged on from most of our usuals. I got Australia, New Zealand, Germany, Hungary, Poland, Holland. I see Sweden, France, Italy now, Spain. Here's a new one, Japan, Great Britain, Canada, of course, Mexico, Brazil, and Israel, plus other countries. If you have a question, place one short sentence in Zoom's QA feature. The Edwin Black Show, along with our YouTube site, is global and fast-growing, enjoying many tens of thousands of views. We speak frankly and without tremor to a fragmented world, seeking better understanding of our tormented past, our present, very, very tense, and a future still uncertain, very, very uncertain. By the way, stay tuned for my special word of wisdom at the very end of the show, just before I sign off. We'll get to a shocking and bothersome episode, Canada Crumbling, shortly. But first, a few minutes of the preliminaries. Announcements. At the Edwin Black Show and our companion YouTube site, we have just released more compelling and hard-hitting episodes. First, our nerve-wracking yet stunning Central Control 2, with a short report featuring bold authors exposing a climate of fear and censorship for Jewish authors at the prestigious Authors Guild. Second, our must-see episode for Farhud Day, subtitled Coming to America, What an Unhappy Warning Video. All episodes are edited with gripping music and imagery. You'll never forget them. My appearance tour continues. In August, I will be among the headliners in Washington, D.C. at the big summer conference held by the Israel on Campus Coalition. I then appear with Empower You of Cincinnati. Hi, guys. I know you're watching right now. Later, I'll be in San Diego, Tampa, hi, Harv, and Palm Beach. See you soon, Ken. Find all my appearances at edwinblack.com/events and let us meet up in your city. Stand tall until we meet. Finally, I remind my viewers of a terrible website publishing the ghoulish videos from October 7th. This site contains just some of the war documentation Israel will need for its prosecutions after the war. See it at hamasmassacre.net and see it before the deniers win their war of denial. Now, before we get to our main topic about Canada's unhappy descent into anti-democratic authoritarianism, I call Zalmi Unsdorfer in London, who has stepped out of a dinner engagement to inspire us. Go ahead, take the screen, Zalmi.
Good evening. Well, good afternoon to you guys on the other side of the pond. Yes, it was an amazing, powerful speech by Bibi. All of the preliminaries to it showed just bad omens. The fact that he could never have imagined that he would be speaking in front of a Congress in such an earthquake of a period when, post an assassination attempt, the resignation of Joe Biden from the race, the uncertainty as to whether he was going to be moved aside by the 25th Amendment. I think that's still open. And then there were all these attacks on him. All these practical jokes that were played on his conference table. They put out some maggots and God knows what. And then there was this demonstration in the Capitol building. Any normal person would have said, "Oh, I just have to return to Israel because of some emergency or some kind," and just cut his losses. But no, he went in there big time. And I have to say, I'm not a crier, but when he was honoring those guys in the gallery, those gallant soldiers, I honestly shed a tear. The tears of pride for our amazing boys and girls in the army. Absolutely astonishing. And to see someone who I never had anything nice to say about, John Fetterman, actually turned up in a suit in Congress to honor Netanyahu. These guys never worn a suit in Congress ever. And it seems that after he recovered from his brain operation or whatever, he just seems to have gone from the left to the right. So I'm encouraged by that. However, I can see now that whilst Hamas came into brought terror to Israel on October 7th, in the months that followed, they seem to have brought total insanity to the rest of the world. You are looking around, I know, obviously you're going to deal with Canada shortly, but you're looking around now at an outbreak of complete and total insanity, whether it is people who are making excuses for Hamas or supporting Hamas, being useful idiots, queers for Palestine, and it seems like every single misfit and loony that exists in the world is pro-Palestine. You just can't make this stuff up. And I think it's going to take quite a while before the world, especially the youth of the world, is able to cleanse itself of this complete and total communal madness.
All right, Zalmi, I think your analysis is spot on. Can you take 1 minute and give us assessment for the leadership in the United States, which is currently afflicted?
I think the blessing came from last week's portion of the Torah, which we read, when the enemies of Israel hired this guy, Bilam, to curse Israel. And instead, he blessed Israel, because at the end of the day, those who bless Israel will be blessed, and those who curse Israel will be cursed. And we are seeing this. We are seeing this being played out. Look at the entire Europe, what they're having to deal with. There are riots breaking out in Britain. We had almost a George Floyd incident 2 days ago with a policeman bashing the head in of a Muslim miscreants at Manchester Airport. We are seeing in Germany massive crackdowns of the Muslim resistance, and we are about to see, starting Friday, the Paris Olympics. God knows what is going to be playing out in Paris over the next 14 days.
You're quite right. And I want to thank you for quoting Numbers 24:9, The Lord said, I will bless those who bless Israel and curse those who curse Israel. And have we not seen miracles and the confusion of our enemies in recent days? Thank you, Zalmi. See you in London soon. Keep my whiskey glass on the table.
I'm going to stay on until my dinner date arrives, okay?
Oh, that's good, because we can always use you to help us answer questions and give us inspiration. Zalmi Unsdorfer. Now is a great segue to our short report on the political scene. We turn to threat analyst and author of The Multi-Front War, Ken Abramowitz. You were in the room at the Republican National Convention. Take one short minute and share with us what it was like to be there with Trump, having just emerged from a near miss with an assassin's bullet. Take the camera, Ken.
Okay, it's great to be with everyone today. The convention was very exciting. You mentioned the near-death experience of Trump, but and Trump, in his discourse, said, "I'm only going to describe this once. It's too horrifying to mention again." And he went through all the emotions that he went through at that time. Very touching. But I just want to add 5 points about the convention. Number one, it was extremely well run. And there were 18,000 people in the stadium, and people were able to come in and go out. They were there usually 4 hours every night for 4 nights. So very well managed. And the security perimeter surrounding the whole intersection of Milwaukee was very well managed by the police, and with obviously reinforcements from around Wisconsin. Number three, the speakers were excellent and informative and enjoyable. And there was a very diverse, number four was a very diverse array of speakers. There were senators, representatives, governors, rivals, entertainers, families, hostages, drug victims, crime victims, business victims, the candidate family. The highlight of the show on the entertainment side was Hulk Hogan, who officially endorsed President Trump in a very emotional discussion. And finally, outside of the convention hours, there were breakfasts and lunches all over the place, so you could get to meet certain senators, congressmen, administration officials, and easier to a meet and greet setting. So excellent convention, and very proud of the Republican Party for putting off such elegant show. Thank you.
Now listen, Ken, just one quick question. How do you think this is going to compare to the Democratic convention in Chicago, which is about to explode in August?
Well, the theme of the Republican convention was unity. In other words, whatever disagreements we had in the past, we don't have them anymore. So DeSantis was there, Nikki Haley was there, speaker after speaker, the theme was unity. And now for the Democrats, the theme will be disunity. And not because they want disunity, but there's two Democrat parties. By the way, there's two Republican parties. 2/3 of Republicans are real Republicans, 1/3 we call rhinos. The Democrats, let's say 2/3 are Democrats and 1/3 are communists, Islamists, globalists, lunatics, loony left, as they call them in the UK. And so there's a big tension between the regular liberal Democrats and the commies. And so that will be in display at the convention and obviously outside the convention.
All right. Thank you, Ken. And now to today's short report, and it is, of course, on politics, as we're all treading water in a political season like none other that I can think of during my decades of experience. What tumultuous times. Most analysts and journalists I know have never seen such a fast-paced upheaval, one right after another, from the presidential debate that shattered the fraud of President Biden's mental clarity to the Supreme Court ruling correctly that presidential actions did have broad immunity, to the attempted assassination of candidate Donald Trump, to a captivating Republican convention that saw an unlikely J.D. Vance elevated to vice presidential candidate, to the White House coup in plain view that suddenly forced out Joe Biden, to the ascent of Kamala Harris as the new presidential pick, and much more. By the time this episode has been edited for release about 4 weeks from now, the Democratic convention in Chicago will have taken place, and I'm certain it will rival the 1968 Democratic convention for riotous upheaval. This is a time when everyone wants and must ask questions, but then it is also a time to question the answers on our airwaves, and the discourse that is filled with so many falsehoods and clever but false allegations of misinformation. So I will try to inject a little clarity right here. First, is Donald Trump a new Hitler? Now, I understand that all my viewers and readers know what I'm about to say. They understand the facts. But for the uninformed out there, please get a pencil and paper. It would be a true understatement to just call Hitler a mere dictator. He was a mass murderer on a scale unseen in history until Germany in the 1930s and the 1940s. Hitler was responsible for the death of 20 million people, including 6 million Jews, and many of those Jews were industrially killed in specially constructed gas chambers to allow 6,000 to be murdered every day. He constructed a massive complex of hundreds of ghastly ghettos and a modern train system to create an assembly line of death and destruction. Hitler invaded many countries and stole their natural resources and enslaved their people. In these genocides, Hitler was aided greatly by 5 American companies: IBM, the Carnegie Institution, the Rockefeller Foundation, Ford, and General Motors. But it was Hitler and his henchmen that were the architects of the darkest destruction the world has ever known. The Democrats, the never-Trump Republicans, and the media know everything in detail about what I have just said. They know history, even if the useful idiots do not. But they are hoping if they shout Hitler in a theater, enough people will actually think there's a real fire around them and then panic for the exits. People, Trump is not even 1% of a Hitler. Next, we get to false statements about Trump. First, that he announced that in Charlottesville, there were, quote, very fine people among both the neo-Nazis and the progressive protesters. You merely need to listen to the video to see and hear his words were twisted to create a Russia, Russia, Russia type falsity. I direct people to Snopes.com, a semi-official, fact-checking and myth-busting and perhaps left-leaning website, which finally, some weeks ago, published a well-documented article entitled, quote, "No, Trump did not call neo-Nazis and white supremacists very fine people," close quote. I will now ask my senior producer, Eve, to post a link in our show notes to that Snopes article. Next, the completely false claim that Trump warned there would be a bloodbath if he were not elected.
After his fiery rhetoric at a rally in Dayton, Ohio on Saturday night, Trump warning while discussing the economy that there would be a, quote, bloodbath if he is not reelected in November.
And this falsity is a known falsity repeatedly made by President Biden and Kamala Harris and many other leading Democrats. Knowledgeable people know that Trump was speaking about a Chinese warning to the U.S. auto industry, and Trump was assuring he would stop the Chinese and save those auto industry jobs. I refer you to a China-oriented publication, The Straits Times, from May of this year, with the headline, quote, "Bloodbath looms in China's overcrowded EV industry." Specifically, that article and many others referred to comments of Xiaopeng. He was the CEO of XPeng Motors, who predicts a, quote, bloodbath against America's auto industry with the help of cheap China-made electric vehicles. Then Trump was campaigning in Vandalia, Ohio, when he cited this open Chinese warning and promised to preserve American jobs. This is what he said.
We're going to put a 100% tariff on every single car that comes across the line, and you're not going to be able to sell those cars if I get elected. Now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole. That's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That'll be the least of it.
President Biden and Kamala Harris both know this, but they continue to spread the lie. Next, that false statement that Trump would be a dictator on day one. Here is the fact. On a Sean Hannity appearance last December, Trump asked by Hannity to dispel rumors that he would be a dictator. Trump was joking around, and he said he would spend his first day aggressively drilling for oil and closing the border as a sort of a dictator, and that was the tall and short of it. Here is the exact exchange.
You would never abuse power as retribution against anybody.
Except for day one.
Except
Look,
what?
he's going crazy. Except for day one.
Meaning?
I want to close the border, and I want to drill.
That's not
Anyone can search those and many more on the internet. Try Google. Next comes this completely fake story that Trump will immediately implement, this wacko extreme right-wing study called Project 2025, a 900-page wish list compiled by the Conservative Heritage Foundation, including numerous former Trump allies who no longer have a position in his administration. Trump has repeatedly stated he is not associated with and will not implement 2025. He has publicly denounced it as, quote, an extreme right-wing document, close quote, he is ignoring, and indeed he is sticking to a massively more moderate Republican national platform. I direct you to articles in Forbes citing the campaign as utterly rejecting Project 2025, and one in CNN, even CNN, entitled Trump Calls Project 2025 Ridiculous, Abysmal, and, quote, wishes them luck. I personally reconfirmed these statements not once, but twice, and that means once this week. I asked Eve to post these articles in show notes. So when you hear Democratic cries by Harris about Project 2025, just dismiss it as another Democratic lie. Trump has repeatedly condemned it, dismissed it, assured he will not consult it, and promised he would not be guided by it. Once again, Project 2025 claims are just another Democratic lie, and they know it, but they're hoping you do not know it. Remember, the Democrats have an odious record of lies, distortions, ethnic persecutions, and voter manipulation longer than any other political party on the planet, including the Bolsheviks. It was the Democrats that demanded that the colonial-era British slavery be retained in the new nation known as the United States of America. When the Republicans, led by Lincoln, challenged slavery, the Democrats raised an army to fight a bloody civil war to preserve slavery as a so-called states' right. This army was known as the Confederacy. After the South lost the Civil War, Southern states raised a terrorist militia of night riders with sheets called the Ku Klux Klan. In Democratic strongholds, blacks were lynched and burned alive on a regular basis. Jim Crow laws were enacted to deny blacks voting rights and normal citizenship. In Virginia, the Democrats even passed the Racial Integrity Act, stating that even one drop of non-white blood in your ancestry made you a second-class citizen, the so-called one-drop rule. You can read about it in my book, War Against the Weak. More than that, they enacted eugenic laws to sterilize blacks, Native Americans, and others who did not resemble themselves. The organized dispossession of the American Indians in the Trail of Tears, Democrats. They also enacted measures to send Japanese Americans into concentration camps in World War II and vanquish their property and possessions along the way. The Democrats, under FDR, ensured that Jews were not aided during the Holocaust. Visas were not granted to refugees at U.S. consulate. No camps were liberated or bombed, and not one stick of dynamite was placed under one railroad track going to even one death camp. When I was growing up in Chicago, we lived in an all-Democratic stronghold ruled with an iron fist by Mayor Richard Daley and his cohorts throughout the suburbs. It was a racial regime where Jews and blacks were not free to seek housing in various neighborhoods and even the suburbs of Cook County, enforced by secret agreements and private procedures. The Chicago Tribune and Chicago Sun-Times Daily published numerous so-called zoned editions where the ads for good stuff ran in the white neighborhoods and black readers only saw ads for cheap liquor and Kentucky Fried Chicken. A great friend and leading Democrat assures me the modern Democrats have changed, and I will always remember his statement, quote, "We don't lynch people anymore." How nice. In the meantime, we see that the party that teamed up with the Klan, the Dixiecrats, the Silver Shirts, and the institutional racial segregation in the northern cities that I grew up with is now teaming up with the Nazified Palestinian protesters and progressives who hate Jews and Israel even more. There is no greater and indelible testament to the hatred the Democratic Party has for Israel than what was displayed to the planet yesterday, where about half the elected Democrats in Congress, including the top leadership, such as Nancy Pelosi, boycotted Netanyahu, and those who did show up frequently avoided joining the continuous sentence-by-sentence thunderous applause and a display of hatred I have not seen in modern politics during my lifetime. Let's not forget the representative from Michigan holding up a small sign saying that Bibi was a war criminal. All the dire warnings I've made about Jewish dispossessions in America and the quick destruction of the state of Israel should the Democrats come to power in 2025. Now all of that, with Kamala Harris, the torchbearer for the riotous left, and shoulder to shoulder with the Michigan and Minnesota Palestinian hate machine, Jews in this country are ever more in peril, and so many in Jewish leadership have been quietly conceding as much to me. It is essential that I'm proven wrong. I'm pleading with our American neighbors to assure and guarantee that I am proven wrong. Unable to run on their policies for the American middle, the Kamala Democrats will run on fear, claiming falsely that Trump is a threat to democracy, even though the most undemocratic electoral stunt in American history was just perfected right before our very eyes. We have just seen the biggest backroom political deal in American political life, with primary elections across the nation for Democrats and Joe Biden dumped in favor of a Politburo coronation. Don't give in to the hate machine. Demand answers to the questions and then question the answers. Having left out 99.9% of this topic, I turn to one of our best election observers, crisis manager Juda Engelmayer. Juda, take the screen for 1 minute and tell us, you know crisis management. Are we seeing an unprecedented climate of fear injected into our political scene?
I think that's all you're seeing. You took the time to go over facts, details, and research websites and things like that. The average voter, the average American doesn't do that. And what captures them is, their anxiety and their fears. And that's what media has done. That's what politicians are learning to do. And if you explain to someone that Donald Trump wants voter ID, which means you're going to lose your voting rights, they're not going to know what that means and the path to that, whether that's true or not. They hear the last line, you're going to lose your voting rights. That's the worst thing in the world. That's fear-mongering. And I think both parties do it very well, but I think the progressives and Democrats have learned how to do it so much more. Everything they're saying, from Trump being a dictator, removing all your rights, becoming an authoritarian country, it's bizarre how they use it. But they're also bolstered by the media as well. Because, while the Republicans might use fear, and when Trump talks, he's not always eloquent, and sometimes he just does use fear, explaining what the opponent's going to do. But in the case of the Democrats, they're bolstered by media for the most part. Most media companies back them up. They applaud when the Democrats applaud. They cry when the Democrats cry, and they toe their line. And that's the most bizarre thing, that media is complicit in this right now. And the Democrats have learned how to use it, and the progressives have learned how to use it. You see it in the coverage of Israel. You see it in the coverage of Donald Trump. You see it in the coverage of the assassination attempt. On certain channels, they were doubting it happened, saying that they want to see proof that he cut his ear. How come he's not taking the bandage off? He's lying about all that. Everything is to make the public wonder, make the public anxious, make the public afraid. And that's what they learned how to do. And it's up to people like you, like everybody, like the average voter, to actually do research. The internet is such a great place to do research if you use it the right way. You don't read social media. You can actually look things up. You can actually find out the truth on these things. And nobody does it, but fear works in that absence.
Judah, thank you for that excellent presentation. Now, you're a guy who works with the media hour to hour in crisis management, and you're a keen observer of what fear does to our social and political scene. Do you think that fear will rule the day, that the Democrats and their fear machine will win, or are you betting that the Republicans will rise above it all and talk policy and sense, even though there will be vituperation during their discussions? Which do you think is going to win out?
You gave me two choices, but I think there's a third choice. I'm hoping and I believe that the Republicans will win because of the fear that they instill about what's going to happen if the Democrats and progressives take over. It's not going to be about policies. It's not going to be about what's actually happening. It's going to be an overblown reality or an overblown stretch of what's going to happen if Harris plus whoever wins the race. It's going to be fear winning all. That's how you're going to appeal to people. And that's unfortunately still how people get appealed to. I think there will be policy. Listen, drill, baby, drill. That's a policy. I think no more wars and pressure China on trade. Those are policies, understood. But the result of Harris, whoever, Barack Obama and Joe Biden's administration winning, it's going to be the fear of what's going to happen, the fear of overrunning the Supreme Court with liberals, the fear of allowing everyone to abort babies till they're 2 years old, the fear of the fear of the country losing its capitalist nature and becoming socialist. All that's going to be part of the fear. And I think both parties do it well. I believe it's a horrible cycle this year, like I said. And the Democrats are doing it a lot better and have immense help from commercial enterprises. But fear will work on both sides.
And is it true that it was reported in the media that approximately a third of all Biden Democrats believe that Trump staged his own assassination attempt, including the killing of that one fireman?
It's not even the polling. It's you're backed up by MSNBC with anchors suggesting that. So forget, once they suggested, if you call me up for a poll, the last thing I heard was it on MSNBC. I'm going to say, sure, it sounds possible. And I think that some of this nastiness is being bolstered by corporate media for whatever reason, either for the ratings or because they genuinely believe the ideology. A lot of people are trending to believe that Trump made it up for sympathy, for votes, to look patriotic and things like that.
All right. Thank you very much. Stick around. And now today's unexpected and unwelcome main topic, Canada crumbling. I grew up in the 60s and 70s when Canada was that nation to the north that Americans cherished as an unofficial utopia, even when America's democratic processes soured or failed altogether. When the Vietnam protesters dodged the draft, they traveled to Canada. When we wanted to rediscover exactly how pleasant society could be, Americans flocked to Canada. Even the Mounties in Canada gained heroic fame in our cartoons and mythologies as nice guys. Now, as the world shifts to the extreme right and the extreme left, both two worlds that have proved themselves inhospitable to Jews and minorities, we see the dream is gone. The fiction has been replaced with a hard reality that our favorite non-American country, Canada, is now crumbling into an authoritarian so-called post-national entity, as Prime Minister Trudeau likes to call it. In the process, to make life so-called better for everyone, that is, in the eyes of the post-nationalists, the machinery of government is implementing or preparing to implement anti-government crackdowns on freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and even freedom of thought. And yes, the word future crime is now on the agenda in the conversation in Canada. This beauteous nation of wondrous mountain vistas, vast forests, majestic wildlife, and very, very civilized people, not to mention the best damn mustard in the world and perhaps the best rye. Well, this precious nation has now proven itself worthy of great worry to those who value human rights, individual freedoms, and universal liberties. As usual, as omnipresent in history's most harmful episodes, from Stalin to Hitler to the American Nazi Party to George Orwell's campaign against the mythical Goldstein, the Jews are the first casualties of injustice, intolerance, and societal hegemony. It is no wonder that in Canada everywhere, Jews and other Canadians are thinking seriously about emigrating from that country. But to where? The world is not coming together. It is falling apart. When anyone asks, but where can we go? The answer is everywhere answered the same way. No one knows. It was entrenched Nazi-style anti-Semitism that exploded after October 7th last year that first attracted me to Canada's accelerating, crumbling edifice of freedoms and equality. Day after day, we now see Jews in Canada's great city threatened in their synagogues and even in their private doorways with abusive insults by marauding Palestinians holding up swastikas and even gunshots at the front doors of their temples. Then recently, a Toronto public school district adopted a policy outlawing a phony and dangerous piece of so-called race hate speech called anti-Palestinian rhetoric. This essentially outlaws Jewish love for and defense of Israel. The new ruling outlaws what 85% of the Jews in the world embrace as their religious tenet, the age-old love for Israel. The situation has just taken a giant step for the worse because the Trudeau government is now discussing admitting thousands of Hamas-loving Gazans as refugees. These people have repeatedly proven they are committed to killing Jews as a societal norm. Now, Senator Marco Rubio and others in Congress have just this week issued public warnings that from Canada's territory, terror-loving Gazans may soon cross the border and engage in more anti-American, anti-Jewish, and anti-Israel disruption, agitation, and pro-Hamas terror or criminal action. We have a terrific lineup of proven Canadian thinkers. First, we turn to one of Canada's most important and prescient national observer, privacy and rights advocate, Sharon Polsky, one of our contributing editors. Take the screen, Sharon, and tell us in your own words, what the heck is going on north of the border?
Well, you've stolen my thunder, Edwin, but you haven't covered everything. Although you did mention 1968, and you know, that's when Pierre Elliott Trudeau was campaigning for the federal election, and that's when he promised a just society. He said that he was going to make sure, when he became prime minister, that he'd remove all of the barriers so everybody could enjoy all of the democratic, social, and economic benefits that Canada had to offer. And it was a grand promise, but he didn't fulfill it. He also thought multiculturalism was important, especially with the rumblings in Quebec. It was important to keep the country whole. 5 decades later, his son, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, has fully entrenched multiculturalism and other public policy measures that might have been well-intentioned, but they've led to some distrust and discord that in turn have been leveraged to create division and discontent that in turn have been the justification for surveillance and censorship and control under the guise of protecting Canadians and democracy. We've seen inflation soar. Immigration has also soared, but commenting about that is often met with accusations of racism. And now we have the potential for comments like it to be deemed hate speech under proposed laws that are being promoted as necessary to protect social cohesion in this post-nation state. We've yet to see the reaction to the request by the U.S. senators this week for closer border security on the northern border with Canada because of that possibility of terrorists crossing into the U.S. And that was a decision by the government to allow an increased number of Gazans into the country. It's a humanitarian gesture. They don't want to see people suffer. That's understandable. But without vetting, it causes problems domestically and internationally and between nations. We've seen the federal public service grow by nearly a third in 7 years, and government is subsidizing many media outlets with more than 600 million Canadian dollars each year, and that's undermined confidence in the legacy media. So it's no surprise that the government employs over 4,600 communications professionals who work to, as they say, correct facts. I'm living in an Orwell world here. Or we also see several laws have been introduced that would enable or require all internet activity to be monitored, users to be identified, and content that the authorities deem to be misinformation to be detected and banned. It should also come as no surprise that the Protecting Democracy Unit, we have one of those in Ottawa, it's in the Privy Council office, and they developed a guidebook for public servants on countering disinformation. Meantime, middle-class Canadians now pay about half of their earnings in various taxes, including carbon tax that we're told will fix the climate of the world. Canadians pay some of the highest airfares, bank fees, and cell phone rates in the world thanks to outlawed foreign competition and government-approved buyouts and takeovers that have eliminated what competition there was. And to compensate, new innovations are being encouraged, often with government funding, taxpayer funding in other words. And the innovations are going inevitably to rely on artificial intelligence and promote digital everything from payment to currency to commerce. For convenience, we're told, but for whose convenience, we're not told. The problem is the innovations also serve to facilitate surveillance. We're told it's to protect Canadians and democracy. But no matter how many cameras you have, it doesn't really do much to reduce crime. In 2022, 30% of murders in Canada were committed by people who were on bail in what many people characterize as a catch and release justice system that's gotten to the point that people don't feel safe in their own homes. So millions of tax dollars for years now have been distributed to municipalities to promote safer communities. And that's often achieved by installing foreign-made surveillance technology. Since May of 2021, in a few short years, more than 100 churches have been destroyed or desecrated. At least 33 of them, and some more than 100 years old, have been burnt to the ground. 2 were suspicious, 2 are still under investigation, and the rest were confirmed or are suspected of being arson, but no charges have been laid. So much for surveillance preventing crime. It was just a couple months later, in July of 2021, that our Prime Minister said the destruction of places of worship is unacceptable and it must stop. It didn't. Like thoughts and prayers, his words and the surveillance systems haven't resulted in tangible action to discourage hate mongering. We have seen a stark increase in the number and frequency of anti-Semitic attacks and pro-Palestine demonstrators who disrupt community events, government meetings. They utter threats, they incite criminal conduct in cities across the country, including at the foot of Parliament in Ottawa. But there's been few arrests, and the ones who do get arrested take advantage of that catch and release system. They're out on bail before the ink is dry on the paper. And typically the targets of their hatred are accused of hate speech if they dare object. Politicians, meantime, have placidly parroted that the conduct is unacceptable. I'm tired of that word. And that hate has no place in Canada, except that the inaction of parliamentarians and many municipal mayors and their support of motions that reward Hamas and their supporters has made it clear that hate does indeed have a place here, as we see people being arrested and charged for hate crimes like leaving tire marks on rainbow crosswalks, I kid you not, and a new law that will see even more people charged with hate crimes for things that they might say. That pre-crime you mentioned, Edwin. It's the same thing we've seen in other countries, where academics and institutions have sponsored, condoned, or participated in anti-Semitic initiatives, or simply instituted anti-Palestinian racism policies. And as for multiculturalism, that we're told is the strength of this post-nation state with no identity of its own, where our Olympic athletes this week are sporting uniforms emblazoned with the name of the country in lettering so small it's easy to miss. Immigrants have been encouraged to protect their own cultures, and many are doing just that, turning what not long ago was a cohesive society with differences and challenges handled amicably, without government assistance, without government interference. It was a country where people retained their identity, but were Canadians first. It's been turned into one with mobs of agitators demanding that companies and institutions and governments do as they command, and fighting battles of foreign countries while enjoying all of the democratic, social, and economic benefits that Canada still has to offer. And worse yet, that cultivated or calculated division and dissent is being leveraged as the justification for new laws allowing surveillance, censure, and censorship. And we can't ignore that elephant in the room, the assassination attempt on former President Trump. If you recall, it was only days after the January 6th incident in Washington, D.C., that Prime Minister Trudeau said that because that event had been organized online, it was essential, it was necessary to monitor all online activity to be able to prevent a similar event from happening in Canada. It was necessary to protect democracy. So we get more online surveillance. And with all of that and more, it is easy to think that Canada really is broken, or the Canadians are fed up with the scandals and the lies and the lack of representation. They are seeing the platitudes for what they are and realizing how closely the measures to protect Canadians and democracy parallel those of repressive governments now and in our recent history. Canada still does have much going for it, and Canadians are a hardy lot, including immigrants who became proud Canadians and worked to make this country one of opportunity and freedom. And that pendulum is swinging, a very sharp blade that will leave many bloodied as it cuts to the heart of the problem. We're not done. It's going to be a very interesting time and a rough ride for a lot of people, Edwin.
Well, Sharon, it's heartbreaking to hear your remarks. I'd like to ask you, what the heck is post-nationalism, according to your Prime Minister? He says that Canada is no longer a nation with an identity. It's now just a post-national state. Do you know what that means?
Well, I know there's a lot of Canadians who aren't exactly sure what it is, and it's an esoteric concept that Mr. Trudeau has pushed, saying that there is no core identity. There's no mainstream in Canada. We all have to be tolerant and inviting and welcoming of everybody else. Our own views really have to be set aside. It's all about the collective. And it's pretty radical, especially when you consider that how it's being displayed. I mean, on one hand, we are citizens of a country recognized by other countries. We have a passport. Our passport, though, used to have images of the country's history, the building of our railway from coast to coast, of historical figures in politics, John A. Macdonald, first Prime Minister of Canada. Now, the passport has been changed. There is a stylized outline of a maple leaf, not even the full maple leaf image. On the cover, there is cartoonish characters of children playing sports, of deer, of animals. There's nothing. It's as if our entire history has been wiped out because now apparently we're all settlers and colonialists, and we're reverting to I'm not sure what, but it's turning into no longer Canada. And that is a direction that the Prime Minister has taken the country, that I don't know that anybody voted for that.
Sharon, what's this I hear that just hours ago, the Jewish National Fund, which is the famous charity of Israel, has now been disallowed as a charitable organization in Canada? How is that possible? This is an organization that has spent years planting trees. What's going on there?
Edwin, it's got a lot to do with the Canada Revenue Agency and our voluminous tax legislation that I'm told no one person knows from end to end because it just keeps growing. It's thousands of pages. There are very strict requirements, though, as to what can be considered a charity under the tax laws. And if you stray, they come looking for you and they will question. And there is a history of a lot of religious types of organizations of all sorts, whether it's Muslim or fundamentalist Christian, now Jewish, being audited, and often it bankrupts the organization.
Tell me about future crime. What is future crime?
It's not about evidence. It's not about facts anymore. It's about feelings. It's not about science, credible, tested science and facts and mathematics. It's about emotion, how people feel. I have to be careful of what I say, lest I hurt somebody's feelings somewhere in the world. And that's what these laws are basically going to do. If I say something that somebody takes offense to, or their feelings are hurt, they will be able to make a complaint to the Federal Human Rights Commission, and their identity might be able to be kept secret. I'll never know who my accuser is, which is not exactly part of the democratic process.
Are you personally aware of Jews and non-Jews who are seeking right now to emigrate from Canada to somewhere? And I would remind you that a mayor of one of your suburbs in one of the cities just said it's a tragedy that so many Canadians are seeking to emigrate. Do you know of anyone who wants to get out of Canada?
Oh, I do. I know people who, part of the problem is, as I was told many, many years ago, the places a Canadian go are places no Canadian would want to go. So our options are rather limited unless you get a specific visa. And these days, there's an awful lot of countries I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't want to go to because of the anti-Semitism, the social degradation, the decline, violence. They wouldn't want to go. I know one young man who had a wonderful career in Toronto. And he has just moved his entire family to Edmonton because of what is going on in Toronto. But it's not just Jewish people. It is people of all stripes, all religions, all backgrounds who are seeing this. In fact, and Tom might be able to speak to this better than I, because of he's on the ground in Ottawa. My understanding is there's an awful lot of immigrants, refugees, people who come to Canada, and increasingly they don't bother getting Canadian citizenship. They stay here for a little while, look around and go, never mind, I'm going home no matter how bad it was there. I'm leaving. This place is not what I was told it would be.
All right, thank you, Sharon. So now we do turn to prominent and intrepid journalist Tom Korski. Tom, take 3 minutes and help us understand what's happening up there from a radio and pencil reporter's view.
Thank you, Edwin. There's an agency in Canada. This is interesting and timely. It's called Statistics Canada. And just today, a few hours ago, they had a report. Police reported crime statistics, hate crimes. Number one group targeted by hate crimes in Canada, not blacks, not LGBTQ, not Indigenous people, not Muslims or Arabs, not Catholics, though a majority of Canadians are Catholic. It was Jews. And you know why that's striking? Is by Statistics Canada's own count on the census, there's fewer than 350,000 Jews in Canada. But there's 40 million people here. What happened? I think October 7th was a jarring incident in Canada. And I mean middle Canada, country people, small town Catholic people who have no deep understanding of Israel or the Middle East or the Jewish experience. They were filled with such revulsion over what happened. And I say to my Jewish associates today, you have a lot of friends in Canada. What hurts is they're not the friends you thought you had. Others more eloquent than I have talked about the anti-Semitism, the casual and often striking bigotry from the faculty lounge. Who saw that coming? No, Middle Canada never saw that coming. I agree with Sharon Polsky. It shows an in-house research by the Government of Canada, which is the only polling data we ever read, because it's the only polling data that Cabinet cares about, because they commission the polls. What does it say? There was a pushback against immigration, typically by about a quarter of Canadians. That's been consistent. And now that has gone mainstream. It is a majority Canadian viewpoint that there are people in this country who don't share our values. And if you had said that 5-6 years ago, she's a racist, you're a racist. That's mainstream opinion now. Something significant happened. Isn't it interesting? In Canada, of all places, subarctic, a land of snow, there was a by-election, and it was a strong government riding, but it happened to have a disproportionately high number of Jewish electors. Toronto-St. Paul's was the riding. And the Liberals lost it. It voted opposition for the first time in 1988. So all these things that we describe, in what should be the happiest land on earth, we're self-sufficient in food, we have more fresh water, we couldn't run the taps for 1,000 years and run out of fresh water. We're self-sufficient in energy. How many countries can say that? Not that many. That's Canada. But we have had maladministration, and I think now there has been a pushback. It's equilibrium. I think it comes and goes, Edwin. I think that's where we are. But this is a moment of reflection and real, quite painful, I think, introspection in Canada about what multiculturalism means, what we owe people who do share our values, and what we owe those who do not. Those are pretty stark questions. I think we're headed into that now.
It's very sad to hear your report, Tom, and I know you're speaking as a journalist. You have a news website, and of course you were a radio man for a long period of time, and I can hear it in your voice. Tom, are you hopeful right now that things are going to get better, or do you fear they're going to get worse in Canada in terms of individual freedoms and democratic rights?
I think that's an open question, which is really something to say, isn't it? I think that's an open question. Others have made the point, and I think it's valid. I think the government has a fetish for control. One of your panelists discussed how people can be frightened, and fear is a very strong motivator. Governments can be frightened too. I think we have a frightened federal government. They were reelected last time with 32.6% of the popular vote. That can only happen in the parliamentary system. I think they're frightened of losing some control. And when governments get frightened, choker's wild, because they have all the cards, especially in a country like this. They control all the police, all the guns, they run all the prisons. As Ms. Polsky points out, they control media through a subsidy scheme. And when you have someone in that position with that control who's frightened, oh yeah, that can go either way.
Oh, that's just sad. Tom, we're going to have you back on another time. Stick around, if you will. This brings us to our third voice, former parliamentarian Rob Anders, a man who knows the government processes from the inside. Rob, take the screen for 3 minutes and give us your judgment. Just how bad is it, and how bad is it going to get?
Well, based on the question that you were asking in terms of do you think people are leaving, the thing that I see is people are wanting to leave the cities for the rural. I mean, it's almost kind of like a Dr. Zhivago scenario where Varikino was this, place, away from the persecution, etc. If you went out into the country, you were away from the commissars. So, Trudeau is kind of doing escapism right now. He's off in Tofino doing some body surfing or something. I've heard that he was actually looking to get to Costa Rica. and take $100 million with him. But supposedly the rulers down there said, no, not on our watch. We don't want you, buddy. The by-election was very significant that Tom was just mentioning. So they have another 3 by-elections that are coming up. And in Montreal, for example, one of the suburbs there, they're not risking it or trying not to risk it. Previously, what they did in that Toronto-St. Paul's by-election was they chose kind of a communications person for Chrysler Freeland. That didn't go well. They lost, and it was one of the safest seats in the country for them. They still held on to, that was one of 34 seats they held under Michael Ignatieff when it was under the lowest number of seats they've had for a very, very, very long time. So now they're running local city councilors, the people that voted for previously, hoping that that will mean they're not going to lose some of these really safe seats. The Conservatives here in Canada have the ability to oust their leader. We incorporated some of the rules that the UK Parliament did and had on the books years ago, where if a significant chunk of the caucus decide to remove the leader, they can, which happened to Aaron O'Toole, but the Liberals never implemented that. So you'd like to think that if the Liberal numbers were trailing the Conservatives, and if the Trudeau numbers were trailing the Liberal Party, then backbencher MPs, particularly in Toronto, in the urban ridings, would decide, okay, it's time for this guy to go. But that hasn't happened. They've been, I think, almost loyal to a fault with regard to him. And he's relying upon Jagmeet Singh, leader of the NDP, who's an unusual NDP leader because he wears a Rolex, drives a BMW, and got elected in a by-election in Burnaby in 2019 and wants to get his 6 years in so he gets his parliamentary pension. So he'll make much noise, but will support the Liberals regardless to make sure he gets his parliamentary pension. We also have this huge debt, situation. It's approaching $2 trillion. Mr. Trudeau showed his true colors with regard to the seizure of the bank accounts for those people who supported the truckers and the convoy. It's a foreshadowing of what can happen with central bank digital currency, which looks like the Bank Act is being set up for that next year. So a lot of issues. You've got, even here in Alberta, they're talking about voluntary jabs for kids. And I just don't understand the rationale behind that. I don't think they were probably ever needed for children. But it's very similar to the thalidomide situation that happened decades ago. Once you know it's problematic, you probably shouldn't be doing it and cut your liability costs. We have a couple so not only by-elections, but we also have a couple provincial elections coming up. Both BC and Saskatchewan are having elections this October. The Conservatives in British Columbia are either leading or tied in the polls with the NDP. So that'll be interesting because that'll give everything west, basically, of Winnipeg more of a conservative tinge. And I think a lot of that is due to Mr. Trudeau.
Once again, you've solidified my unhappy feeling about Canada. Let me ask you a question, Rob. Are you personally worried about individual freedoms being grandly curtailed in Canada?
Absolutely. Most of my friends have seen jail time. I helped out Pastor Art Polsky. He's been in jail for 51 days. I have a colleague of mine, a guy that I've known, been a roommate of mine actually back in university days, John Carpe with the Justice Center. He's been jailed. I've been down at the protests in Milk River and Coots with regard to the lockdowns and mandates and jabs and stuff. No, it's a very troubling scenario.
What are these guys in jail for?
Well, with Art Polsky, they just didn't like that he was protesting the jabs. He held massive feeding the poor. He does a lot of work to look after the homeless on the streets of Calgary. And so he didn't like what was going on with the jabs. He felt it was very similar to what he saw in Poland under Solidarity. And or before Solidarity, I should say, under General Jaruzelski and the communists. And so he went ahead and had a massive barbecue where he fed people in -20. I was out at that. It was a lovely event. But he's faced all sorts of persecution. I myself and Art have faced persecution from the Canada Revenue Agency. I had 7 charges laid against myself. They were all thrown out of court. But nonetheless, I'm still having to go through tax court with regard to getting some of my money back on this stuff. It's there's real persecution going on here for sure.
Do you know measurable numbers of people who are looking to emigrate from Canada as a result of the diminished freedoms that you're talking about?
I think more people were looking to go to the United States under a Donald Trump presidency, but once Biden came in, I think a lot of people said, well, is Biden any better than Trudeau? There's a debate. But if Trump returns, next year, I think you're going to see a number of Canadians. I think a real question will be raised in Canada as to whether or not we are allowed to become political refugees and to claim asylum to get out of Canada, because there is a lot of persecution here.
So you're going to come here, but don't worry, we're going to give you Whoopi Goldberg if Trump gets elected. She's on her way. And I know that Tom can't wait for that to happen. Let's get to some questions. Now, I'm loaded with questions here. We don't have a lot of time left. We had a very full show. But let's first get to the villages, the watch party in the villages. With Harris, are we going to get closer to democratic control and the destruction of Israel that you've warned about? Ladies and gentlemen, do not underestimate Kamala Harris. Do not think that she's just a big laugher and all of that. I know that's how she's portrayed. She was a stunning questioner in Congress. It's true, she was viewed to be more liberal and to the left of Bernie Sanders. She can read the teleprompter about 30 times better than Joe Biden. She is closely aligned with the most radical elements, including the most radical anti-Semitic and anti-Israel elements. I know her husband's Jewish. I know there's a mezuzah on the vice president's door. I don't care about it. But the fact is, she will do anything and say anything for the two-state solution, Minnesota and Michigan. Let's go to the watch party in Newton. What is the White House coup that you described? Well, it was a White House coup, and I've studied a lot of coups in history, palace coups, and they're generally quiet coups. This one was openly encouraged by the entire media. Now, they used two major words in every headline to force Biden out. One word was as, A-S. So, in other words, if Biden went into a restaurant or into a meeting, it would say, Biden goes into meeting as pressure mounts for him to leave. The second word they would use is amid, A-M-I-D. And the headline would read, Biden meets with 4 world leaders amid people question his mental competence. So whenever you see those two words, amid and as, you know the media has a prior agenda. So no one voted for Kamala in the original primaries that brought Biden to the presidency. They disregarded 14 million votes in all these primaries coast to coast. They overturned them. They did this enormous bait and switch where they went out to everybody and they said, give us millions of dollars so Joe Biden can save democracy. Then they undermined these elections and they just forced Biden out. And I'm told that Biden was forced out by threats of the 25th Amendment. And for anyone who thinks that that's sheer gossip, everyone was talking about that on both sides of the aisle. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, while the Democrats are telling us that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, they undemocratically overturned elections coast to coast and disenfranchised all of those voters who voted for one guy. And that guy went out repeatedly and said, the elites are trying to push me out. I'm not getting out. I'm staying in. But I reckon something happened, the threat of the 25th Amendment or something we won't find out for a while. And so that was the White House coup. Judah, you want to say anything about that stuff?
Well, yeah, first I wanted to say that I don't know how disenfranchised they are, because I think they'll still get behind Harris over Trump anyway. So I think the Democrats know they could have done whatever they wanted to do, and the loyalists will stay loyal. But as you're saying, the word "as" and the modifiers they were using was because they're trying to set you up. There's a reason for it, and they wanted that the electorate to understand that this is happening because of, and that's what all those setup words are about. That's under pressure, under this, as that, because that's their way of cueing you to lighten the load. Like this didn't just happen. Biden did it because of these reasons.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And do you have any understanding of the official reason for Biden withdrawing from the race, but claiming he can serve out the rest of his presidency?
I think they told him they're not going to invoke the 25th on him, and if he did, they'll let him ride it out. I'm sure there's some deal with Hunter Biden as well. I'm sure I'm sure there's a few things going on, but I think that they told him that he will not get elected. He's not going to get support, and he's going to destroy the party. And Biden, as much as he has an ego, also doesn't want to have a legacy of being the one to have ruined the Democratic Party. And I think they made it seem like this would be the death of Congress, of Senate, and the presidency for a long time to come. And that's not where he wanted to go out. And I think he also knows he's feeble. I think he knows where he stands also, and they convinced him that they're going to out him if and push him if he didn't move on his own. I think there are a lot of reasons. He didn't want to. He was defiant. I think that it was clever of them to do it when they did. The Republicans should have been prepared to talk about the Democrats and not just Biden. And most of them just attacked Biden without even thinking that this was going to happen, which was weird. They should have been more prepared for that. But then, so they wasted all their energy, spent a lot of money and a lot of airtime talking about Biden. Then he drops out of the race. Now all the attention's on Kamala, and they didn't get, and they lost their opportunity.
All right. Thanks very much for that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think we're out of time. We had a jam-packed episode. I want you to hold for my closing word of wisdom just 1 minute away. But first, I want to thank my very knowledgeable guests, Zalmi Unsdorfer in London, Ken Abramowitz in Palm Beach, Juda Engelmayer in New York City, and in Canada, beloved Canada, Sharon Polsky in Calgary, plus journalist Tom Korski and former parliamentarian Rob Anders. I also thank my talented international team, including Richard in the Philippines, Luca in Serbia, Christine in Indiana, Virginia in New Jersey, Lance in Detroit, and Nick in London, as well as many others in numerous additional cities around the world. My team, each of them, is comprised of very dedicated people. I and we all owe them. I'll see everyone back here in 2 weeks at 3 p.m. Eastern. You want to be a friend of the Edwin Black Show? Go to the edwinblackshow.com/support. Keep me independent. Thank you, Phyllis. You want to hear me in person? Watch my website for events. Consult my events page at edwinblack.com/events. Until then, head over to any Barnes & Noble in the USA or any Amazon, Walmart, Apple Books, Google Books, or Kobo platform in 190 countries across this roiling, toiling, boiling planet, where you can find any of my 215 book editions, such as IBM and the Holocaust and the Farhud. You want an autographed copy? Hit my personal, newly redesigned website, edwinblack.com, and click books. Thank you, Wes. Get access alerts to participate live in future shows at theedwinblackshow.com. You can see a much enhanced and exquisitely produced version of this show and prior episodes by subscribing to our YouTube channel at The Edwin Black Show, and click that notification button like tens of thousands of others. You will love them. We put new ones up each week, produced by a bold international crew. Follow me at Edwin Black Book on X as well as Facebook. And now for my closing word of wisdom. Yes, you must get answers to questions, but then you must question the answers. I'm zooming out from our nation's capital. Thank you and bless you all.